welcome John Jones.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and very, very honored guests. My mother taught me to be a free thinker. She instilled in me and my siblings a vision of free will. I simply took the ball and ran with it. I suppose you could qualify this speech as my official icebreaker because 2 weeks prior to today, I used that time to state a different message. This won't be so much a list of things I've done or places that I've been as much as it will be a reflection of what I've picked up along the way. I've titled this, My Unremarkable Life as a Rock and Roll Musician. I say unremarkable because my mom impressed me with many wonderfully redeeming values, not the least of which was humility. And to this day, even though I have a pretty strong sense of self-esteem, I still find it a little difficult for me to think that my life is especially important in the grand scheme of things, especially if it would be compared to those who have shaped our world and altered our collective history so very much. I use the phrase rock and roll because all my life I considered my story to be much like a rock and roll song. I've been impressed and empowered by rock and roll music ever since I saw Elvis Presley and the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. Some of you may remember that. As a child, I learned that playing a musical instrument made me likable and popular with the girls, and I've always stated that that's why I got into the music business in the first place. Looking back now, I realized that my life would not have unfolded any other way. I was the youngest child of 4. My siblings are all female. My mother was the matriarch of the family. My father was a very honest, hard-working man, but my mother was the dominant parent and raised us with her values and her skills, state-of-the-art as they were at the time. I was the baby of the family. Let me rephrase that. I am the baby of the family, and I will take every opportunity to remind my sisters and my mother of that. I take full advantage. My anthem for that era was Paul Simon's song, Feeling Groovy. I felt very groovy as a child, and quite honestly, indeed, I still do. The 70s were filled with adventure, free spirit, and I took liberties at every opportunity. My musical skill was increasing, and I started to perform in nightclubs and festivals, much to the adoration of my friends. I was starting to express myself as an artist. In 1975, I enjoyed my first glass of wine. In 1976, I joyfully got high with my friends, and by 1979, I was doing both on an almost daily basis. I was 17 years old. My anthem for that era was Crosby, Stills, and Nash's If You Can't Be the One You Love, love the one you're with. I quite often wasn't, but I quite often did. The 80s weren't much different. I skated through a couple of years of musical and general education classes at a local college before I decided that school really wasn't for me and it wasn't something that I was going to need to be a rock and roll star, remarkable or not. My skill was such that I could keep an income, so I went on the road with the band. We performed at some of the biggest, most influential rock and roll cities in America, such as Joplin, Missouri, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Elkhart, Indiana, to name just a few. Anybody who didn't go out on a Saturday night in Camden, Arkansas in June of 1984 really had no idea what they were missing. That's right. But looking back at it, perhaps they were better off. In the 80s, I thought that happiness was found in spandex, long hair, and the freedom of the road. Those were my lost child years. That was my walkabout. My song was Billy Joel's My Life, which basically stated, leave me alone and let me do it my way. The 90s were a blur, and I really don't remember much about it, to be honest. There wasn't much excitement on the music scene, and I found myself in Las Vegas pursuing the glitter and the glamour that only that city could provide. It wasn't until the end of the decade that I started to ponder those two questions that plague us all at some point. Why am I doing this? And what's it all for? On September 9th, 2002, 2 days before the first anniversary of the World Trade Center bombing, I changed my tune. I awoke with a conscious decision that I would no longer allow the influences of my addictive behaviors to decide my fate and run my life. 24 months after that, I had gained enough clarity for the very first time in 30 years to look back at my rock and roll life and see what I'd received throughout. Would I have done it any differently? Knowing what I know now, perhaps. But we all have to go through the lessons to get where we are. The truth is, here we are. You've all done it individually and collectively. So maybe, just maybe, it wasn't so unremarkable after all.